Well, greetings to the web. My name is Miss Habanero Pepper, and today I'm going to do my very first book vlog, which is kind of interesting because, pandemic. But hey, I'm gonna try and make it work. So, the book I'm reviewing today is Mark of the Dragonfly by Jaleigh Johnson. It is the first in a series known as The World of Solace. I'd advise that you check out the other books. I can't exactly provide you a link or anything because that would be copyright infringement on the author. She's supposed to make money off of her work, so try to go to a library or maybe buy it at Barnes and Nobles. So I'd like to show you the cover first because 9 times out of 10, what usually tends to appeal to people first is the cover. Let me show you it to you really quick. Yeah, that's a pretty nice cover, isn't that right? Plus it's green. Green is awesome. I'm going to just flip this so I can have this picture up for the rest of my talk. So let's be frank. Fantasy, well, no, not fantasy. Reading actually is often something that doesn't appeal to people at first, especially in our modern day where you're more likely to just pick up a phone first than an actual tangible book, especially because of the pandemic, because we're also worried about infection. And don't get me wrong, we should be concerned, but not overly, oh my gosh, I gotta get into a bunker kind of concerned. We just need to be careful. We often tend to stop going to social events, or if we do, we're often really cautious and stay away from people. But sharing stuff like this, sharing books, sharing movies, what have you, is a really good way to reconnect the world from the separation that we had earlier in March. In case you haven't noticed, March 12th, the day from my perspective, because that's when it really started to come into this little bubble that we live in here in the US. Well, bubble around the world, really. Who am I kidding? It would be a really good opportunity to share stuff like this. So without further ado, I'd like to give a bit of context into the book I'm about to share with you. We start on a dark, stormy night. A little cliche, true. A girl named Piper, who is a machinist. She's really great at filling with machines, and the moment she touches them, they sing to her, and she knows not only how they work, but how to fix them if they're broken. She's put into an event where one of her friends brings out this trinket, a magic box, from the storm that's going on. Now, the thing is, the kid shouldn't actually be in the storm because it's harmful. Think about hurricane level, okay? And Piper, after a series of events that causes her to actually follow her friend down to the storm and try to help him find more trinkets that he could possibly sell on the market, she encounters this girl named Anna. And the whole adventure that's created around them, trying to get Anna back to her home in Novine, the capital of the Dragonfly Kingdom, has this really interesting concept of a world that's not only combined with technology, but also with magic. It's kind of like a fantasy sci-fi, what have you, combination, collision, hybrid kind of story. That's actually pretty cool. You don't find that very often. We're starting to move into that sort of genre now, but in the past, we didn't really think of overlapping the genres. So I think this is a really good introduction to that kind of thing. All right, so I'm going to be honest. I'm the kind of person who likes to hash out the details first and understand them, understand how they tick before we get to the big picture. So, even though this is kind of odd, I'm starting off with dialogue. You have to understand, when you're writing a story, it's really hard. You're trying to show people a world that they've never been to, that they've never seen. If you're not an artist, you have to try and show that, display that through words. That is a really difficult profession. Getting in there is super hard. So I really commend Miss Johnson for doing that. It's a really great series, I tell you. The dialogue is natural. It flows in a way that shows that's how the people of that world actually talk. If you were to suddenly fall into the world of Solace, that is how they would interact with you. It's natural. It suits the environment that they're put in. Piper, the main character that we're first introduced to, she's a girl from a scrapper town. They're not really well off. They're poor. They have to live day to day in order to make a living. And it's shown in that, in the slight prejudice that Piper shows towards the stiff hips or the rich people of Soulless. But at the same time, we don't only see her prejudices, but we see how she's a real person. That's often kind of difficult to do from time to time. She has sarcasm, she has spunk, but at the same time, she has compassion for the people who are closest to her. Having dialogue that represents the character without doing an info dump that's super duper explicit, just blah blah blah. This is how it is. This is who this person is. This is their background. Yada yada yada. That's really good. So the next thing I would like to talk about is the characters. I'd actually like to bring them up on my phone because if I had the actual book, there's actually a picture of all the characters on the back. So as I'm sure you should be able to see, top over here is Piper. This is Anna, the girl that she finds in the storm wreckage. And this little guy down here is Guy. Now, I don't want to really go all the way into them, but they each have really good character development. Often you tend to have characters that are super cookie cutter, I'm going to go about it, and they're cliched. You have the super stoic macho dude and the really sensitive damsel in distress kind of a female protagonist. But instead, I'd say that despite the fact that this book is technically meant for middle school, probably early high school at the latest, maybe for some elementary schoolers who are a little mature enough to handle some of, well, it's not like an explicit book or anything, but there is an issue with the slavers that use the deaths that come from the storms. I'd say it's also okay for like fifth graders, perhaps fourth graders at the very latest. I'd say they have really unique character development. They're all fleshed out. Piper's the sassy one, she's good with machines. Anna's the really intelligent one book-wise. She has a lot of knowledge on the natural functions of animals, how they interact in the environments. She makes a lot of comparisons to Piper in the course of the novel. One being that Piper is as fierce as a Mara goshawk. I found that one particularly funny, as I'm sure Piper did eventually down the road. Guy is more of the security man of the train that Piper and Anna have to escape on. As I said, there is a great deal of adventure that the novel is based on. And at first, you kind of tend to think, gee, this guy's a jerk. At first, mind you. Yeah, I know that's how it happens with all of them. They hate each other and then they're best friends by the end of the novel. But he has this really interesting character arc in which, through finding out about his background as he interacts with Piper and Anna throughout the story, we begin to understand the kind of person that he is. He's compassionate, he's loyal, he's courageous. He literally flies into danger to save these girls. Now, I'm not saying that they're damsels in distress. They can fight for themselves too. But it really shows how well Miss Johnson characterized each of these characters to have them interact in the world that she created for them. To see that, that's really good. So the next thing I'd like to address, which is actually the third and last thing I'd like to address really, is the world building. As I may have mentioned before, writing is really, really hard because you are trying to show people a world they have never seen before. Believe me, I know how hard it is. I've had to write stories myself. Some of them were for school, some of them were for fun, some of them were for contests. You really have to try and know exactly what you're doing. You can't just write off on the fly because you need to have background knowledge. I mean, even for the fantasy stories I write, I had to know something about what I was referencing. If it was fairy tale material, sure, I read fairy tales, but I want to see that there are multiple versions, multiple instances that are in those versions that are really special to them based on the cultures that they originate from. And I think Miss Johnson does that really well. Even though obviously there aren't any pictures except for the title, the cover page that I showed you earlier, she represents it really well. I can tell that the Marrow Kingdom that we first start the story in, it's bleak, it's desolate, but in the way, by its own way, it still has this kind of color to it, this kind of sheen that represents the kind of grungy sci-fi bit of it. And then as we slowly start moving towards the Dragonfly Kingdom, we enter this bazaar where Piper and Anna go to try and find out a little bit more about Anna's past. The market there that's described, it sounds so beautiful. There's, well, I can't, I'm not going to explain it all obviously to you. Miss Johnson will probably show it to you better through her own writing, but it's really beautiful. And I think that seeing that kind of imagery, showing it through her own words, that will actually help some kids who are interested in getting into writing their own stories. It'll serve as a really good example of how to actually show your reader and not just tell it to them, even though you're using words. It's a complicated kind of thing, but don't worry, you'll figure it out. Okay? And finally, last but least, this is my little bit. Let's close up with one good value you can learn from this book. That would be the power of knowledge. There's this one instance in the book where G himself, because he saved Anna and Piper, ends up in a situation where he is put in a fatal situation. It's something that happens to his lungs. I'm not going to go all the way into detail about that, but it could have been fatal to him. And Anna, who had actually read a ton of books despite her memory loss, as mentioned in the novel, she recalls much of that information from time to time. She uses that information to actually save his life. I think the one thing we underestimate is that when we grow up, I want to be a singer or I want to be a dancer. And I'm not saying that you can't do those. Those are really good jobs. There are people who make a lot of money off of them. Exhibit A, Beyonce. She does both, apparently. So good for her. But we also tend to underestimate how important intelligence is, how helpful it can be. Because of intelligence, your doctor who takes care of you. The medical field is doing a lot for this pandemic right now. They'd only be able to do that because they went to school, they went to college, they took all the classes that were necessary for them to understand how this pandemic works, how to make the vaccines that everybody's getting right about now. So intelligence, knowledge in general, can often be used to help someone and save a person's life if need be. So obviously that was a bit of a serious note, but I'm going to link my blog at the bottom of this YouTube video. This should be a YouTube video. I'm going to try and post it. And hopefully you'll check it out. I'm going to try and post some content on there afterwards. Well, farewell to the web. Bye.